Greetings, friends. Greetings to all of you. My name is Ian McKenzie, and I'm the host of this weekly show, The Crow's Nest, where we look at topical events through a mythic lens and really wherever we tend to go. And I'm delighted for this conversation to actually be joined by two guests who are actually in the same location, which is a rarity, to jump into their new book called Reckoning. And before I invite them on, I'm going to share a little bit from their biographical, from their bios, and maybe offer a little bit of my own relationship to certainly one of which I've managed to attend the schooling of for a number of years now. And so Stephen Jenkinson is a spiritual activist, author, ceremonialist, and farmer. Stephen teaches internationally and is the creator and principal instructor of the Orphan Wisdom School, founded in 2010. With master's degrees from Harvard University in Theology and the University of Toronto in social work. He is the author of several books, including the award-winning Die Wise, a Manifesto for Sanity and Soul, Come of Age, The Case for Elderhood in a Time of Trouble, and A Generation's Worth. Stephen is the subject of the National Film Board of Canada feature-length film Griefwalker, and the subject of a few shorts that I've done myself with Steve over the years, including The Lost Nation Road, about the live show with Gregory Hoskins. And Kimberly Ann Johnson is a sexological bodyworker, somatic experiencing trauma resolution practitioner, birth doula, and single mom. She specializes in helping women prepare for birth, recover from birth injuries and birth trauma, and heal from sexual trauma. She's the founder of megamama.com, an international holistic women's healthcare resource for expectant and new mothers. And she's the author of the Fourth Trimester and Call of the Wild, alongside, of course, this very book, Reckoning. And so, welcome both to you, Kimberly and Stephen.
Thank you.
Hi, Ian. Thank you.
So what it is a rare event to have you both together here.
Very
on
rare.
the Orphan,
First time,
the
actually.
Wisdom Farm. Oh, really? First time?
Yeah.
Well, I understand it's the middle of the school is happening now, of which I myself was, my cohort about a month ago now, which seems oddly far away, but also so present. And I wonder, Kimberly, if you could share a little what's happening here in the school at this moment that you've taken a breath away, I think, from. Well, both of you have.
Yeah, this morning we had class, and you're wanting to know a little bit of what the class was about?
Oh, just what it's like to take a breather and to do something like this in the midst of the wonderings of which I know myself, over the years, of how it can maybe feel a bit of whiplash to step out.
Yeah, well, I've been in Stephen Jenkinson's orbit for about a year now. So the tenor of most of my life feels like I'm running on two tracks. And so this is just a continuation of that, to be feeling like I'm molding clay at the same time as I am, serving the book and serving the people who will maybe read the book.
Mm. Well, let me start with the title then, because I know there's a deep love of words, and words matter in the school, and certainly the title Reckoning. And I would love to hear, maybe from either of you first, what is being reckoned with in this book?
Okay, let's see. From my end, my participation in it was, I was very, and remain very troubled by the allegations of, by the approximations of justice that seem to permeate if we can call it, the general discourse. And I've never really centered these things out as a particular area of concern for myself, largely in anticipation that maybe they'd just go away quietly on their own without any broom from me. But quite the contrary, they're gaining in popularity, momentum, and consequence. So I think that that combined with, obviously we're not of the same generation. And I was really mindful in an engaged way what my little contribution to the fray could possibly be for people of Kimberly's generation and her children's generation too. I was kind of, my concern was bifurcated across that scale and that span. So So I put my oar in the water on behalf of, anybody younger than me for a change. Generally speaking, I've taken sort of dead aim at people of my generation or so, and asked more of them than is common. And this I asked more on account of people younger than me for a change. That's my reckoning.
Mm.
For me, I was surprised. I picked up my first book, The Fourth Trimester, the other day, and on the first page, I say the word reckoning twice.
Wow.
Yeah. And so that really surprised me because I didn't realize I had such a relationship with the word and that it meant so many things to me. But for this project, it means sobriety with a lot of principles and words that have come to be standing in for goodness, or standing in to be the right side of things, or standing in for someone who's spiritually conscious, and the reckoning and, in my case, reconsideration of those things. And some examples are regret, openness, obligation, words that always had a negative, well, either a strong negative connotation or a strong positive connotation. And, this whole book came about for me, the initial, it's a conversation book, a dialogue book, because of almost like what we just had right before we got on. Stephen Jenkinson told me, I'm in his house for the first time, and that there used to be a wall in a place and there's no longer a wall. And one time I had friends who had a duplex, and one side of the duplex was an office and the other side was their house. And one day I walked in and there was a place that you could never pass through before, you could pass through. And I felt like I had just walked into an Escher painting, because it seemed completely impossible that would, I couldn't even fathom that those things were connected in that way. And so my encounter with, let's say, this way of looking at the world, or this assignment of what it means to be North American right now, and to not, I thought I was a pretty responsible spiritual devotee. I didn't think that I was somebody who recklessly appropriated things or took without giving. But through the pandemic, and realizing that the quote unquote communities that, and I use that word now because I don't think there really were communities, but even the word community, realizing what the underpinnings of that was and how I was a part of it, really had to come apart, and is coming apart. And I'm still in that undoing process. And so the reckoning for me was reckoning with those worlds that I'm a part of. And instead of someone telling me that, I matter, and that what I do is like important, and I can make a change, and, just keep believing, to be met differently, for me was a reckoning.
There's this quality in the book as well. And I think also what you're speaking to of, in a sense, a willingness to encounter intergenerationally in a way that, again, maybe seems uncommon, like the willingness to maybe speak honestly, maybe is the word that's coming to me right now, but yeah, a kind of raw willingness to speak on things and what wasn't done. I mean, Steve, you've spoken about spirit work being like the necessary task, right, of each generation, and by not doing so, the spirit work accrues, to the next generations. And I'm thinking as well, there's a story about that woman, I think it was in Mexico, right? The young girl who ended up asking what you did. And this is a couple years ago now, right? But basically you said, this is right when you're writing Come of Age. And she said, something along the lines of, we got it now. Like we got the I guess the leadership or the elderhood.
I know what happened to people of your generation. You don't have the wisdom anymore. We've got it now, basically, is what she said. Yeah.
Yeah. And that there's something in that, like I could see that as one way of essentially that poverty or that heartbreak showing up, right? Of this unwillingness or this the younger's looking up and saying like, where were you guys? You know, you haven't been here. And then I see in this conversation some kind of generative wrecked on scheduleness that is made visible through this encounter. And that's what I see in this conversation, and what's captured here in this book is, yeah, the willingness to have that encounter publicly, in a sense that it's, you know, now we can read it and we can speak to it, and that seems rare, that kind of generational encounter can happen in a way that isn't grievance, right? But it's actually a sort of faithful willingness to grapple with, yeah, how do we come to be with this way, and how might these generations actually maybe not see each other as enemies in a sense, right? But somehow heartbroken together.
Well, I think the notion of candor it works better in the circumstance you described than, quote, honesty. Candor is a willingness to engage in a kind of structured or disciplined inquiry that has genuine consequence, and that you fess up to that before anything ensues. I think that's what we and still do undertake, actually, even in a format like this. And I learned that, thank God, in the death trade. You know, sitting beside people who are dying, there's not a lot of room to be an idiot. I mean, there's plenty of opportunity, but there's not much in the way of merit to frigging around and to obfuscating and to speak in half measures and to at least do no harm. And that, I mean, how do you behave as if a person of genuine substance is sitting right beside you, as she is now? How do you do it? And the answer is you have regard for the substance and you engage it. You don't underfunction just in case the substance turns out to be spun glass. You know, and so in terms of the assumption that somehow, because we're of different generations, there's an inherent likelihood of hostility or remoteness or some problem to be overcome. I mean, I think that only comes from the understanding that we have to somehow have a joint understanding of anything in order to be able to talk together. That the fundament has to be shared. I think the fundamental sharing between us is a willingness to hold the other person in genuine regard and treat them like a grown-up and proceed accordingly and translate that. So that's something to be proud of, especially these days where underfunctioning is the order of the day. It's mistaken for respect.
Kimberly, did you want to speak to that before I kind of offer something actually of your words in the opening?
Well, I think that, you know, it's all there's just an accepted vocabulary these days. There's words that stand in for meanings, and a lot of talk about acceptance and inclusion and words that are supposed to, just that word is supposed to mean that you do that thing. And what was heartening about this project and encounter for me, the ongoing encounter, is that somehow, you know, it's very tempting. I mean, you've been at Orphan Wisdom School, Ian, so you know there's a lot of people that talk like Stephen Jenkinson. And in fact, at first I was like, I don't know if I want to do this because I don't want to talk, like I don't want to be in the lingo and the jargon and have to talk like this and do this thing to be a part of it. That was kind of my hesitance, one of them. And, you know, it's really hard to translate these ideas into a world that doesn't have these same kind of considerations or expectations for dialogue. So I think in a way, that's what I came to be a proxy for, is how do I value this way of being, thinking, respecting, and then come back into a world where that's not the ground I'm walking on. And it's not even what most people understand. And how can I be real? People are so impressed by my vulnerability. And I'm like, I mean, I don't, the expectation is that because I've written a couple of books and because I guess my website looks professional, that somehow I wouldn't subject myself to the same kind of rigor or, I mean, authenticity is such an overwrought word now, but just a realness with how troubled that I am about the world I'm in and being a parent in this time, and to have somebody who's already considered a lot of those things and clearly has landed in some kind of a place with it. So these kind of interactions are like with you, with a third person, they're also interesting because the default is for me to try to be a professional, right? And for me, like, I'm smart, so I could learn the language and I could give you the response that's like, the confident response, but that's really disingenuous to where I am, because as you read in my piece in the book, it's really still just filled with questions. It's not really filled with arrival spaces. I didn't come to this school and then learn how to shear sheep, and I'm not like weaving on my loom back at home. So but even when I say that now, that does somewhere in me is like, oh, but that my life would be better if I did that, or if I did this other thing. So for me, this whole idea that we can be reduced to what we look like and then assumptions based on the words that we use is really, that's the peephole into the thing that I'm trying to spread back open.
You know what's happened, Ian? You know what's happened is vulnerability, in heavy quotation marks, has become the secret strength, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's not a real vulnerability. It's a staged and crafted one in which you go through the motions of exposure to things you're not absolutely either comfortable with or that you don't function in the context of officialdom with. And the thing that works about this is that it's not over, and it doesn't have a goal, and it's not trying to get over something so that we can somehow represent somebody else. I mean, I don't think either one of us are sitting here as generational spokespeople, not in the least. And I don't think I would say it differently, the lion's share of our concerns don't happen to follow along the standard generational or even gender-driven lines, I don't think. There's other kinds of allegiances that each of us in our fashion have that are not secret strengths.
Well, you speak about performative vulnerability, I suppose, and somewhere in there for me conjures the epitome of that, which is like a Instagram post of yourself weeping to show that you're so vulnerable that you would weep on social media. But of course, the other side of you is, I've just seen a few of those, quite a few of those. Kimberly, I want to go back to a point you made around sort of encountering the Orphan Wisdom School and the grappling with Steve's take on things and trying to make sense of it. And I'll just offer a little motif, which is if you've ever seen that TV series Home Improvement, Tim Allen, I think back in the day, it might even be old enough now that some folks don't remember it, but he had his next door neighbor, right, that peek over the fence, and he would like the enlightened kind of neighbor. And Tim would always go up to him, right, and grapple with whatever was happening. And then Wilson would deliver that line or two that just captured exactly the wisdom of the moment. And then he'd always try to come back and offer it up, kind of half baked, right, to his kids or to his wife, and they'd say, "What are you on about?" In some ways, I feel that's too early. Those scholars in the school that kind of come with, "Whoa, this is what Steve said about this," and again, if it's not quite living, then it comes across as it's not yet translatable. And I say for myself, I've grappled with that for many years, and how it shows up in a way that seems more maybe alive or true to me is in other things, right? Certainly my crafts or my films and things like that. So that work of translating, I feel, there's always a time lag in that.
Definitely. But there's so much desperation and heartbreak that's informing the desire to be a different way, that's like, sure, like, let's give ourselves time to bake in it. But when you're at home and your children's friends are in rehab for self-harming, and you're completely confused about whether sending your kid to school is even a good idea anymore. And they've seen films on unschooling. And I mean, if I could count the number of adults that have told my daughter when she says, I hate math, that like, don't worry about it, math sucks, and they hated math too. And as the parent who's trying to buy into the school and their child needs to have some confidence that that is something that's important, there's no shared philosophy on how to even be with that with a child. It makes you want to adopt something else that makes a little more sense or seems to be working for somebody else, and take the other people around you and, you know, proselytize something else that just might get you out of a little bit of the desperation and a little bit of the feeling of like, we don't have much time, because we're inundated with that feeling. Our children are inundated with the feeling that, you know, the temperature is rising. And I mean, last time I was at Orphan Wisdom School, I had to ask the people that I was sharing my room with, like, are we all in agreement that the world is ending? Because I'm just not really sure. Like, is this really the apocalypse? What's happening? Because the way that the way that the few people that I already knew that I came here with were talking, they had to really break it down for me. But the feeling that there's impending danger all the time, whether it's from the environment or from people that, you know, you're a public figure, so I'm sure that you've gone through something over the pandemic with people commenting and deciding who you are based on who you talk to, based on what you say. Well, I've been through that same thing. So, you know, it makes me want to pull in my little octopus tentacles and you know, go find my loom and sheep, hypothetically, because it's like, why am I even doing this? Especially if there's only 15 years left in the world, then yeah, it really seems dumb to care about my daughter's math class. But if I'm going to take it upon myself to live in a way that somewhere, possibly sometime down the line, might have some perfume of interconnectedness or relatedness, then that's what I want to do. But I don't want to make it sound like I'm better than all the scholars, because I'm not. I'm in the same boat, but I understand what it feels like to feel like you're, you know, trying to put you're climbing a mud wall, and the mud's maybe wet and you're sliding down it.
Thank you for that. You know, it does remind me of your passage here that you, I think, maybe predated, I mean, the first conversations, but I understand you did speak, you did a little series from folks in different aspects of the vaccines. We don't have to talk about vaccines at all, but you said this point here in the book. I was interested in how we got to the point with so little common ground, where civil conversation was so difficult to have, even between people with whom I used to share so many common values. And it makes me think as well that to reckon, one has to be able to to agree on what's happening to some fashion. And I feel like that's become so difficult for, I mean, many reasons. But one, Steve, you've spoken at length in different contexts around this truth, I suppose, or this presence of a we. Like, is the presence of some kind of we amongst people necessary in which to finally come to some ground together? Because I feel like that's the thing that is most fugitive these days, is even coming to know who is willing to be willing to come to the same ground as you, you know, without needing to oppose or agree. So how does one approach even that in order to reckon, or even to reconcile, which was something obviously that came up. And the requirement, of course, is to reconcile, to meet first before you can meet again.
Well, I felt like I needed to, instead of be abstract about things, I needed to get a little bit concrete about things. So in that project you're referring to, where I might have interviewed 5 or 6 people, I really asked people flat out, are you vaccinated? Because I felt like what was happening was everyone was being in the universal abstract. And if I would say certain things, people would just take whatever I said and make it mean the thing that they wanted it to mean. And could I say, for instance, that I personally am vaccinated and my daughter got vaccinated? She got vaccinated before I did, which was really weird for me, because there's a lot of things I would absolutely say no to her about, like certain vaccines for example. But in this case, I felt like she knew really what she wanted. And so anyhow, I got vaccinated, she's vaccinated. And then people started saying like, well, then you're pro-authority because you're vaccinated. And, I'm a home birth advocate. I had a home birth. I deal with the medical system all the time. I'm absolutely suspicious, beyond suspicious. I'm completely devastated by the impacts of big pharma, but I had to do the calculus that hopefully many people were doing. But instead of sometimes doing that difficult calculus, a lot of people opted out of the difficulty and into sort of an alternate version of facts and reality, where you don't have to, where it's science versus nature, technology versus nature, and all kinds of fracturing doesn't have a foundation and doesn't have, a lot of people said to me, well, I'm just doing what my body tells me to do. And I really had to look at that, because I'm a somatic practitioner that's telling people how to interpret what their body's telling them. But their body telling them to or not to take or not take the vaccine is like a lot different than looking at a very large picture, multi-factor picture, and that includes so many different things. And so for me personally, I felt like it was important, rather than staying in the abstract. And of course, many people wrote me and said they were completely disillusioned by me. I'm not who they think I am. I don't represent what they thought I was because of that choice. I also have like close friends who I would call community, who I eat with every week. And one of them was quitting his job because his job was making vaccines mandatory. And the other one, so we were pretty much almost as opposite as could be in terms of what we thought the meaning of it was. But what we had was grief together. What we had was the ability to talk about it, but also to know when talking about it was too much, and that we were trying to impose our viewpoints on each other rather than be heartbroken about it together, and be willing to see that in this case, those friends are ones who have, if we're going to talk about solutions, which is not the greatest word, but they have lives that represent what I consider to be very interconnected and interdependent, with skills that I personally don't have in my own toolkit yet. So I learned so much from them. And so just to be able to continue being physically together, I mean, that had a lot to do with it. We lived in the same place, and we could actually go to each other's houses every week and be together. And so in this period of time, that really wasn't the case for so many relationships. And so they happened out in idea land, and out in philosophy land, and out in the land where you can abstract someone into being the straw man that you disagree with, that's easier to relate to than the human that has so many different parts of themselves that's influencing why they're making the choices they're making. That said, I also had friendships that didn't make it through.
Oh, Steve, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
Only that I don't think the notion of I don't think is best understood as how people feel about each other. I think the accomplishment, which is derives from the willingness that people might have to proceed as if certain things are so, or at least needing of us. So it's the work that you find the capacity to be we together in. You don't establish that person and go look for a convivial enterprise that doesn't challenge anything. Yeah.
Thanks for that. I feel like at least in the closing remarks too in the book, that there's this wondering about citizenship. And in particular, Kimberly, you also write, it was clear that an individual healing path, and this is speaking to your own work, I think also I think you speak in the beginning, this idea you're in the sort of white wellness world, or have been in there. And I would say there is this undercurrent, I would call it belief in change, that individual change automatically leads to collective change, right? It's sort of an unquestioned assumption. The more I work on myself, the more that, things will get better. And you say here, it was clear that an individual healing path did not de facto turn someone towards the collective good and towards citizenry. And And so that I think is worth spending a bit of time on. That's a kind of reckoning into itself, right? It's sort of a willingness to question sort of the fundament of that whole approach of individual betterment automatically, like a continuum, which, Steve, in the last school we did, of course, you spoke so much about eclipses, right? And there was this recognition that certain things that are assumed to be a continuum are actually not. They're an eclipsing and, in fact, an obscuring of what might be. And so I saw a relation between these things, that this idea of the personal growth automatically leads to something. Eclipses, it doesn't lead to the collective good on its own. And so, yeah, I wonder if you might speak to that.
Me first? Well, I just got a shorty.
You're the eclipse guy.
Okay. I don't think. Sorry, I lost it. I lost the thread of the first part of your question. Could you just say it again? Some part of it?
Sure. Just the sense that the idea that the personal growth, let's say, automatically leads to collective good.
Right. I think that the assumption that underlies that is the notion that all the collective, not my favorite word, that what a community or a village is the sum total of what the individuals are. This is a completely misapprehended notion that is very short on an understanding of alchemy. The alchemical confabulation, which is a community, is something that the sum of the individuals can't begin to approach. No, it converts the willingness of people to congregate into something they have to contend with, as well as something they can do. They have to find some way to inhabit the thing that they've called into being. So you don't do that with a collection of individuals. You do it with the understanding that the lion's share of your individuality is not particularly called upon or even required by the community that you seek.
Kimberly, what might you say there?
Well, it seemed like what you were talking about is like this whole idea that we are a microcosm of the macrocosm. And so the world entirely lives in me, and then whatever happens in me, I exchange into the world, and that's good enough. That's that's kind of like the best. That's the best we can do. Like you're hurting so much, so like the best that you could do is, in my case, regulate your nervous system, because you regulate your nervous system, then you're going to be automatically regulating other people's nervous systems. And it's not entirely untrue. There is part of a truth to that. But for me, it was, it really just comes down to personal work or culture work is really what it boils down to. It's like, if I don't want to discredit some of the things that I think do work within what I have done. But at the same time, it's like you're standing on one floor of the house, and then you find out you need to be on another floor of the house. It just like, it's the foundation of it is different. And so what I've been seeing, and what I'm so disheartened. Disheartened is like an understatement. I'm like disgusted by the trauma world. I'm disgusted by talk about performative, and it all it's the currency of the whole thing is not just suffering, but it's like amplification of suffering and exaltation of personal circumstances. I do think that from a gendered perspective, oftentimes for women to believe that what happens, that our voices matter, and that what happens to us within certain contexts like medicine matters, and be able to use our voice, there is something that needs to happen in terms of coalescence of energy that's a little bit different. I think for women, we have an easier time being in the underworld in general, and oftentimes don't exactly know how to be traversing the worlds as well. But I just kept coming back to, having to give people a different level of orientation, because the temptation is that we just keep going along with these solutions, which we have, which right now is basically one-on-one therapy. If you're sitting in a group of people and someone says so-and-so's having a hard time, the first thing they're going to say is, are they in therapy? Or oh, they're taking psych meds. Are they going to therapy too? You can't just take the meds without the therapy. And it just can't be. It can't, because if everyone is suffering so much, which from the looks of it for me is, that's really not that big of an overstatement. Either people are completely anesthetized and frozen, and so kind of like robotic and continuing on with something, or sick in all of the different kinds of ways that we can be sick. Then one-on-one therapy just cannot be the solution. It just even, I know we're not in only rational land, but even from rational land, there's not enough people. We can't train enough people to be working one-on-one with everybody. And for me, that's been the question to myself over and over, is like, what is more upstream than where I'm at? Because if this problem that I'm contending with, which in my case is, just rampant sexual abuse, but not even, yes, abuse, but also just the gray area that is relating right now, that then so easily gets put into, who is the predator and who is the prey and who is the perpetrator and who is the victim, with absolutely no grace for the fact that everyone, and this is a bullshit statistic, but like for me, I always say, there's just like 10% of people that are just like, they're really messed up, but the other 90% they might not be trying to do their best, but they're living in this soup of this gray area where nobody knows the rules anymore. Nobody knows. We don't have etiquette. We don't have expectations. We have these paper thin ideas of equality and justice and inclusion with no experience underneath it. So it's not that I don't work one-on-one with anyone anymore. And it's not that I don't think that some of the things are important. Many of them are important. It's just that my sense of urgency and legacy lead me to want to do something that is beyond a one-on-one thing. And prior to this, I guess I could say that I wasn't 100% sure about the microcosm, macrocosm, but I was just leaning against it, because that was the underpinnings of all of my yoga practice and all of the meditation practice. And I don't think I could really live with myself as somebody who, I have an undergrad degree in social policy, who cares about systems and structures and society. I don't think I could have moved too far forward if I really said to myself, well, this arrangement it's not good enough. And it wasn't good enough at certain times. And I changed paths. But now it's a whole other level, because the measure of quote unquote success has just been completely changed.
As you spoke there, that sort of reckoning with, as you said, the what's upstream of what feels like maybe the flood, that's gaining. And I'm hearing shades, I believe, Steve, of your story as well, when you back early days did counseling, I understand, or in some fashion, and that you had that, it might have been in Money in the Soul's Desires, but you said something along the lines of, I realized I was just turning people back to the culture, to an insane culture, and in many ways perhaps led to the seeds of the Orphan Wisdom School, right, as a wondering of what else might be done.
I think it's important, because you still do talk to people one-on-one sometimes. It's just, you just don't have an office where you do it.
Well, yes, that architecturally you're right. But I think what the encounters that I'm willing to have are predicated on an understanding that we're not engaged in a process. Generally speaking, I wouldn't do it twice with most people.
Okay.
Yeah. Why? Well, because the chronicity of the thing is its own seduction.
Okay.
That's just the part that I can't sign up for.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of all or nothing now. And you could say, and properly so, hey, what if a lot of people can't do that because they're in the soup and they can't they can't hit the mark. And I would say, well, maybe they can't hit the mark for 40 minutes, but for 20 minutes or whatever it is, maybe it's available. And you take your chances and you don't count on tomorrow. So apropos of your observation, is it getting worse, or where are we in the ticker? You know, how close to midnight are we, and so on? Well, I'm proceeding as if it's a given that we've seen more of this arrangement than we're likely to see. We ought not to count on too much more. You know, and I'm not. This doesn't alarm me to say it, and I hope there's no alarm, certainly none intended. But this is akin to the difference between you find out you're going to die. What's that called? Well, that's called life. It was always true. But you find out you're dying. This means something else. This means that something should change as a consequence of the fact your tomorrows are clearly limited in a way that was lost upon you before now. And the great act is the act of translating. That's the circumstance I think I'm in. So when I agree to see people in a sort of consulting capacity, basically it's with that predicate in the background, that this is it. And we ought not to count on tomorrow. And I don't think we're serving our little lives much by imagining that if we save some for tomorrow, there'll be a tomorrow where we can visit what we saved. So it makes me a bit of an extreme character, I suppose, just in terms of maybe how that comes across. But I'm just an urgent character with sometimes with a severity that is a consequence of brevity, not a consequence of desperation, just brevity. I just don't want to go on forever and ever. I don't want to indulge. I finally found it. I'm not interested in the process of people going through incremental change and endless reflection upon it. There. I don't think I've ever said this out loud before. I'm just too old for that shit. I mean, I don't have a lot of time, and it's not what I want to do with it. I'm just not a process guy.
Well, I think there's something about, I mean, I'm interested in that comment about process, but there's something about the assumption that in a one-on-one interaction, what we're doing is attachment repair, and attachment to basically one person or two people. And that is, you know, a study. Those studies are from the 40s, from the strange situation and attachment theory. But what we're saying, even that is based on a nuclear family structure. And and that's a consequence of something else that's not here that we're all remembering and somehow kind of starving for. And that's just, that starvation is getting distorted in all kinds of things. So I can see that. I mean, I don't like to do serial one-on-one work either, but I always thought that was kind of my problem, because I just don't like to be, I like the radical intervention, I guess. I like being the one to be there and identify something and do something about it, and then move on and let the person do with it what they need to do with it. And it just seems to be one of those things that, you know, even Stephen and I were in Ottawa on Tuesday, and one of the last questions was, you know, are things really that bad? And is this just not what happens? It's just every generation, you know, leaves something. And it was my first question, the first time I ever spoke to Stephen Jenkinson, because I saw this phrase, troubled times. Yeah. And I'm not from I know for some people, troubled times and end times is really heavy because they come from fundamentalist backgrounds, and I don't. So I didn't have any experience with this phrase. And that is exactly where my mindset went, which is like, well, is it really that bad? I mean, doesn't everybody always think that their kids aren't really, you know, they're letting them down, or, you know, people lived through wars before, and all of the ways of rationalizing and assuming the inevitability of being in the place that we're in now.
you have this phrase in the end of the book too, which just struck me, is, Steve is also can be known sometimes as the, maybe not anti-hope, but hope-free, certainly. But you have this phrase here. It says, you say, I can live without hope, but I can't live without possibility. And so it's something in that connects, I think, to what you're saying, though, this sense of, well, because if it is so bad as it is, then it's hopeless. I mean, it's kind of, for me, what I hear in the backstory for folks that are like, wait, what? Grappling with that. And here you say, I've never heard this phrase quite like this, though, too. I don't know if it dekes hope and just kind of gives it a new dress, or if it's something else entirely, but I wonder if you might speak to that. I can't live without possibility.
I think your question is really interesting. I think Stephen Jenkinson's wondering the same thing, and I'm also wondering the same thing. At the time that I wrote that, so I wrote that in March of this year, I mean, again, we can't abstract the fact that there's a lot of people that are really in bad shape right now. Like, can't go to work, don't want to go to work, have given up on anything really making any kind of a difference at all. Maybe are really sick for some reason. And I was really asking myself, like, well, of all the things that I have to do, because as I write in the piece, like, I don't have small children to take care of. I don't have, crops to actually engage with in my hands. My life to this point was really spent on my I was a dancer and, yoga teacher, and on my physicality. And I was really lamenting not having skills that I would have already put into place in certain ways and learnings that I didn't have. And so, I mean, I'm deeper in with hope and hope-free and understanding because of the chronology of things and how hope is always in the future and it's always about something next. But I was really trying to figure out, well, like, I was in an existential straitjacket. Like, well, what do I even do? I mean, writing that piece was so hard for me for so many different reasons. One of them being that I've written books that got turned into quote unquote guides. I didn't set out to write a book that was a guide, but in both cases, they ended up being guides. And that's what the publisher, the word guide had to be in the title of the fourth trimester. And they're very good books. I'm very proud of each of those books. Nevertheless, writing in this way was something completely different. It was really exciting, but it was also terrifying because I was and still am. I think one of the questions I had that didn't make it in the book is like, can an invertebrate be a scribe? Like, if you've taken off all of your shell, can you still have a pen? And like, to what? I've questioned everything. Like, what is the good of putting out one more thing? What is the good of writing something? The basis of the situation is I don't know. I'm not firmly planted in another place. I didn't leave one world and end up in another, and now I've got it taken care of, and I'm completely without any kind of questions about how I move forward in the world. I'm doing complicated calculus all the time of, people that work for me. My daughter, who I'm exclusively responsible for, the end of the last Orphan Wisdom School, sort of like the culminating moment was about surplus and kind of like what surplus does to us. And it's like, I've been working so hard for the last 4 years for surplus, to have a savings account, to have money for my daughter to go to college. And it has taken its toll on me, but it was something that at least at that time I felt was like a good idea to do. And so, so many, to say that I can give up hope, but I can't give up possibility, to me is the thing that I think musicians sometimes have in spades, which is just a soul thrust of something that's living through you, that's pushing you forward. And at that time, I didn't know where that was. And so for me, it had to be the possibility was the, what I came up with.
Thank you. I hear in your words too, the echoes of good Mr. Cohen's One Wild Bouquet, being willing to thrust it up despite it all. Now we have a few more minutes left, and I'd just love to actually offer this
Ian,
passage.
Ian, excuse me.
Yeah, Steve.
let's do justice to the reference, okay?
Okay,
Okay.
let's do it.
It goes like this. I'm sentimental,
Hmm.
if you know what I mean. I love the country, but I can't stand the scene. And I'm neither left nor right. I'm just staying home tonight, getting lost in this hopeless little screen. But I'm stubborn like those garbage bags that time cannot decay. I'm junk, but I'm still holding up this little wild bouquet. That's
Hmm.
the fullness of what you were remembering there. I thought he
Thank you,
deserved
Steve.
it. Yeah,
Yes. Thank you, Steve.
yeah.
Okay, so here's just to send us off then. This passage that I feel I was touched by it, and how this is in Steve's words in the closing remarks of the book, and I thought maybe I'd offer that, and then just a few closing words, whatever might stir from hearing it now, read back to you both. But Steve says, "I'm at it here again anyway, one more time with feeling, just before the lights go down. This time though, somebody's on the other side of me, tangling with these dark days. There's you. And there's your child. And there's the oh my goodness of it all piling up by the side of the road. You are an ordinary citizen, a citizen in a weaponized time. And so am I. What do we do? What do we tell the kids? What will we mean to them in 2030? And that's something that is just echoing, it's reverberating for me and throughout this work. And that question, what do we mean? What might we mean by the way we act now, I think is present. And so I wonder, as we send off our time today, what might you offer and speak to that?
Well, I'll go first. Anybody can put a mark on the end of a declaration and pretend it's a question. But I hope those aren't pretend questions. I think they're legitimate, authentic, and bordering on dangerous questions. And I don't know what the answer is. They're not rhetorical, I should say. I don't know what the answer is, especially to that last one. Although I'm getting a pretty good idea that there's a certain degree of foreclosure that's in the works now. That there's not a lot of wiggle room for either my generation or Kimberly's in terms of what we collectively will mean to people who are 14 or 16 years old now in 8 years from now, when they're not teenagers, when they're not the center of the retail universe as they currently are, when they're unceremoniously dumped on the refuse pile of former peak consumers and things of that kind. And if things become, worse than they are, which is not an if really, then the question becomes, did you know what was happening? And what did you do? And I think the more desperate question is the first one, to be honest. Did you know what was happening? Tell me you didn't, because then I can live with how things have come to be as they are. That by virtue of you being boxed out of the information stream, you didn't really know. And that accounts for why things have gone as they've gone. That's a more livable circumstance than people of my age or Kimberly's age looking them square in the eye and saying, oh yeah, we knew.
Kimberly, what might you say to that?
"2030 doesn't seem very long from now." And, there's a line in the piece that I wrote at the end, which we called those end pieces blessings. And I said, I thought we were in purgatory and you think we're in hell. And that date 2030 to me just seems really soon. So yeah.
I agree it's soon. And I think our time frame is not as elastic as we imagine. Yeah. But of course, 2030, I may not even be here at 2030. So of course, it sounds a little more like the curtain's falling. rather than just another year on the old odometer of life.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm.
For which I make no apology, by the way.
Mm.
At this stage of the game, a sense of urgency seems called for. So that's what you're hearing.
Well, thank you both for encountering me here in this conversation and for encountering each other in Reckoning, which I understand is most available through Orphan Wisdom. If folks want to get themselves a copy of the book.
Only available through Orphan Wisdom.
Okay, exclusively available. And if people want to be encountered by this book, as I have been, and maybe you've been here today, thank you both for taking the time out of the school as well to come do this. And I wish you sturdy wandering in the rest of the days to come.
Thanks.
Thank you, Ian.
Bye.
Bye-bye.